It was a cabinet shuffle that was really not supposed to happen. Yes, ministers were moved in and out of positions like we've seen many times, but this shuffle was prompted by the dramatic resignation of Jody Wilson-Raybould from cabinet in the midst of a political controversy. 3 ministers now have new job titles. Minister of Agriculture, Lawrence MacAulay, has taken over Wilson-Raybould's Veterans Affairs portfolio. Minister of International Development, Marie-Claude Bibeau, has moved over to the Agriculture file. And Minister for Women and Gender Equality, Mariam Monsef, is keeping her current file but has also picked up the International Development portfolio. While that unfolded at Rideau Hall, opposition MPs on the Hill continued their calls for a criminal investigation into the SNC-Lavalin criminal case following allegations. Sorry, not a criminal case. They want a criminal investigation into the case following allegations of political interference. The CBC's Katie Simpson is following this story, and she joins us now. Hey, Katie.
Hi.
Thanks for being with us. So what's the latest on that?
Justin Trudeau may have been trying to sort of change the channel or change focus for his government with today's cabinet shuffle. We know that they had to put someone into the Ministry of Veterans Affairs. And the Prime Minister, when he walked into Rideau Hall this morning, he sort of brushed off reporter questions, didn't want to take any of our questions about SNC-Lavalin. But if he was trying to sort of avoid focusing on that, everything he essentially touched inside Rideau Hall just was a reminder of the current state that the government is in right now. Everything from having to find Jody Wilson-Raybould's replacement in Lawrence MacAulay as the new Veterans Affairs Minister, to having to stand next to Michael Wernick, who is Canada's top civil servant. He, of course, is one of the key people that Jody Wilson-Raybould alleges was part of this pressure campaign. And the pressure did not let up in the House of Commons either. We heard from both the NDP and the Conservatives calling for either Trudeau to testify at committee, urging the RCMP to investigate, or calling on the Prime Minister to launch a full public inquiry. And even the cabinet ministers themselves, who were taking on some of these new roles, they seemed uncomfortable even when being questioned about Jody Wilson-Raybould, the impact this story is having on their party, and whether she should even be allowed to remain in the Liberal Party.
I would say that I know Jody quite well, and these decisions are made by the Prime Minister, and whatever decision that's made, I can live with any decision that is made, but I know Jody, well-respected lady. Thank you very much.
I agree with colleagues. It is ultimately the Prime Minister's decision.
So they were later asked about, what is morale like right now, given all of this? And I know that in conversations I'm having with sources, I suspect in conversations that you're having with sources, the morale is not so great right now amongst the Liberals. Yeah, and but Lawrence MacAulay stood up there and said, everything is fine. I don't see an issue with morale. We have a job to do and we're doing it. Thank you. So I think that actually speaks more volumes than perhaps saying there's no morale issue.
And we know how much we're talking about it here domestically, but there's also conversations happening elsewhere about this story.
This has finally spilled into the international arena in the way that some had predicted it might. Canada is facing a very difficult situation with China, which we have spoken about many times on this show. The Chinese government wants the Canadian government to intervene in this court case against Meng Wanzhou. She's the CFO of Huawei. She was picked up on an extradition request from the United States because she is facing very serious charges, as is Huawei in the United States. Beijing has demanded that Ottawa intervene in this, and there's been a very significant misunderstanding between Canada and China over this. Justin Trudeau has said Canada has an independent justice system. We are a country that is rule of law. China has said, no, you need to end this. We demand that she be released now. And there hasn't sort of been a deep understanding that Canadian politicians don't interfere in the justice system. Well, with all of these allegations about the Trudeau government allegedly trying to intervene in this case against SNC-Lavalin, today the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson seemed all too delighted to get a question about whether Canada is being hypocritical here.
我太喜欢你这个问题了，但是我觉得这个问题可能应该向加拿大政府去问。事实上，你所提到的这个案件，加拿大国内现在高度关注，这个公道自在人心。现在事实上，不光是中国公众，不光是加拿大公众，恐怕全世界都会非常有兴趣听一听加拿大政府怎么回答这个问题。
So is this overall, this debacle with SNC, is this now going to chip away at Canada's credibility with China to stand there, for Justin Trudeau to stand there and say, Canada is a rule of law country. We don't politically interfere in any sort of court case. We will not interfere in the case of Meng Wanzhou. But China now seems to be all too delighted to see Canada try and say that again with these very serious allegations it now faces.
All right, thank you, Katie. The CBC's Katie Simpson. For the 8th time in the last decade, Canada has a new Minister of Veterans Affairs. Today, the Prime Minister shuffled Lawrence MacAulay out of agriculture and into the department that was briefly held by Jody Wilson-Raybould. So what is job number one for the new minister, and what's his take on the SNC-Lavalin affair? Lawrence MacAulay is the new Minister of Veterans Affairs and Associate Minister of National Defence, and he joins me now. Hi, Minister. Thank you very much for coming in, and congratulations on your new portfolio.
Thank you, Bessie. It's a pleasure to be here.
I appreciate your time. I want to, of course, ask about your new portfolio, but first I want to ask you about the issue that prompted this cabinet shuffle, and that is the controversy surrounding Jody Wilson-Raybould. Do you think, personally, she should remain in caucus?
Well, that's a decision that's made by other than myself. My job, Bashi, is to make sure that I fulfill the requirements that the Prime Minister gives me to do. And that's, in fact, what I do. I don't decide who was in and not in, or who has or has not got to do with caucus. My job is to focus on my responsibilities, and that's fully what I do.
I understand that it's not your decision, but I'm wondering what you think. What is your opinion? Do you think
I
she
know
should remain?
Jody quite well, and I certainly liked her. She was my seatmate, and there's certainly issues at the moment, but I would not comment on decisions that are not mine.
Your colleague, Minister Bibeau, who takes over your portfolio, said earlier to me on the program that the DPA, the Deferred Prosecution Agreement, should still be an option for SNC-Lavalin. Do you agree with that?
Listen, quite simply, I'm not a lawyer, and I don't believe it would be appropriate for me. I haven't dealt specifically with these issues, and I'm not trying to escape your question by any means. I'm just saying that it would be inappropriate for me to, in my view, to give comments on the Government of Canada, on my view, being a minister, which I'm not completely aware of all the legal indications.
Do you think it's inappropriate of her to do so? I mean, she's also the Minister of Agriculture now. She was the Minister of International Development. I think she was coming at it from the perspective of an MP in Quebec and someone worried about the loss of SNC jobs. But you don't share the. I mean, I'm trying to wonder. I mean, this is a cabinet discussion, obviously, that has happened at some point around deferred prosecution agreements. You don't want to comment at all on whether or not they're appropriate in this case?
It's something. Again, I'm not at all. I know Mary Claude very well, and I must say that agriculture is in very capable hands at the moment. But issues that I am not dealing with, I have many issues to deal with, and I intend to deal with them.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about those issues. Let's talk about Veterans Affairs. You're the 5th minister since your government was elected in 2015 to occupy this portfolio. What kind of message do you think that sends to veterans?
I must add, too, that I was there a number of years ago, and it's a great honor to be back. What message I would give to veterans is that it's a great honor to be able to speak and represent veterans, over 600,000 of them in Canada, to speak for them at the cabinet table. I had the privilege years ago, and I have the privilege again. It does not, quite simply, ministers administer what takes place and make sure that the government policy, government direction is addressed, but ministers are given a mandate letter. And I have just arrived, but I understand that the mandate letter has been about fulfilled or close to it. And the next few days, I will be briefed on those issues. But again, my job is to make sure that that mandate letter is fulfilled and to make sure that the requirements of veterans, the people who put their life on the line, and volunteer to do so that you and I can have open and free discussion here. That is quite an honor to be able to represent those people. And I do not take that lightly. That is a big responsibility that I look forward to doing.
Do you think, though, the high level of turnover has sent a message? And I take your point that there is a whole bureaucracy at work here, but this file has been political for a long time, prior to even your government coming into power. I mean, 5 different ministers in 3.5 years. Does it send the signal to them that they are not the priority that your government promised they would be?
Or I think it would be desperately inappropriate to indicate that they're not a priority for the government. A government that invested $10 billion into this portfolio certainly understands the importance of this issue. Quite simply, the government fully cares. The government knows very well that it's their responsibility to make sure the veterans receive the proper attention, that they receive what they need. It could be education, it could be training, it could be programs, it could be pension for life. There are many, many things that must be done, and that will be done. My job is to make sure that it's done, and I will make sure that it is.
My colleague Murray Brewster first reported that the government is facing 4 class action lawsuits over a $165 million accounting error that went undetected from about 2002 to 2010, and shortchanged about 250,000 veterans on their disability awards and pensions. The plan right now is to start reimbursing them as of 2020. Can you move up that timeline prior to the end of your mandate?
Well, I didn't do much on figures yet. I was just here with the Governor General's, came back and met my deputy,
Understood.
and then came to see you. So I think, yeah.
But are you aware of that story?
I am aware, but not fully briefed on it. So if I can move the timeline up, yes, I will. It's just kind of like removing poverty in this country. We moved it up by 3 years. Like, things happen, and it's important that we keep pushing. My job is to make sure that the envelope is pushed, to make sure that we provide the proper benefits, the proper programs, and whatever is needed for veterans. That's what I will do. And if I can speed this up, yes, I will.
So you're open to doing it?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Minister MacAulay. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be here.
And these decisions are made by the Prime Minister, and whatever decision that's made, I can live with any decision that is made, but I know Jody, well-respected lady.
Whatever decision will be taken by the Prime Minister and or the whip, I will live with it, and I'm really a team player.
I think the Prime Minister said it best, Katie, that he's going to take the time to reflect on that, and I trust that judgment.
Those are the 3 ministers who received new titles today in a mini cabinet shuffle. But as you heard, they're being asked about their former cabinet colleague, Jody Wilson-Raybould. Her recent resignation is what necessitated today's shuffle. It remains unclear, though, if Wilson-Raybould will remain in the Liberal caucus. Here to assess the latest moves in the SNC-Lavalin controversy is, of course, the Friday Power Panel. In Montreal, Marty Patriquin of iPolitics, and here with me in studio, Le Devoir's Marie Vastel, iPolitics' Marika Walsh, and senior writer for Maclean's, Paul Wells. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Marie, I'll start with you. That question of whether or not she will remain in caucus is so interesting to me. The answer, everyone in the Liberal caucus is being asked, and there's a variety of answers being given. But what do you think of how tenable that is?
Also a variety in answers depending on if you have a microphone in their face or not, right?
Good point.
Which I also find interesting. Is it tenable? I think when you talk to people without a microphone, some are recognizing that it's maybe a little delicate because they are saying that perhaps the confidence is threatened, if not broken. And can she sit in those or attend those in-camera meetings where essentially you kind of hash out your disagreements and you actually say what you think? People are worried. Can we still count on her discretion, given that she wouldn't reiterate that she has confidence in the Prime Minister? I found those non-answers very interesting when Katie Simpson asked the question. And when she re-asked the question, and Marie-Claude Bibeau was essentially, next question, I'm not touching that. I don't know how long it's going to take for the Prime Minister to make a decision. It seems like he's not in too much of a rush, thinking he's going to let these 2 weeks of, I don't want to say holiday, but like of non-sitting, sit and then let people go back to their ridings, let the dust settle, perhaps wait for Jerry Butts' testimony and see how that plays out and falls out. I think the challenge for caucus management and caucus relations is that Jody Wilson-Raybould does have still, I mean, some people don't want her in caucus, but she does still have some allies. Jane Philpott was very public in her support of her. Selena Caesar-Chavanis, I don't know.
Chavan,
thank you, was very public on Twitter about her support multiple times, about her support of Jody Wilson-Raybould. And so I think you kind of have to be careful that by getting rid of one problem, you don't create more by angering the people that are left in your caucus.
Paul, what do you think?
It's not clear to me where the safest place for the Liberal Party is to have Jody Wilson-Raybould. And if they kick her out of the caucus, by the end of next week, there's an old horror movie whose tagline was "The living will envy the dead." People left in the Liberal caucus might wish they were outside with Jody Wilson-Raybould by the time the dust settles from this mess. I mean, it looks like the fact that Jerry Butts is going to be testifying next week leads one to tend to believe that what they're going to try, they're going to seek to expand this conflict rather than tamp it down or hope that it goes away. And so we'll have a great week next week. I don't know if the Liberal Party of Canada is going to have a great week next week. And that thought seems not yet to have occurred to the Prime Minister's office, that these are different things. That when journalists are happy, maybe they're doing the wrong thing. But I'll leave it to them to figure out their brilliant three-dimensional chess strategy.
Marika, Paul brings up the point that we are expecting Jerry Butts next week to testify before the Justice Committee. We're also expecting Nathalie Drouin, the DM of the Department of Justice, who's already been before the committee, but also the Clerk of the Privy Council again to appear after that first infamous appearance. Now, Michael Wernick, what are you anticipating?
Well, what's so interesting to me is the fact that this just extends the story. I'm so confused about the strategy behind this committee sitting, because the OIC and when the OIC was given and when privilege was waived means that we're playing this twice instead of once. So that is not helpful for the Liberal government. And I think that what we see, though, in that testimony will help to inform how Trudeau deals with Wilson-Raybould, whether she stays in caucus or not, because if they can swing credibility their way, then they have a bit more room to maneuver. But again, given that there are so many balls in the air, given that things like the ethics commissioner could still land who knows when, it's very difficult for them to make any decision on her.
What do you think the testimony will hold for Canadians, Marty?
I think this is. I'm a little bit in disagreement with all this. I think having Butch come out and say what he says, you're basically creating two hash marks. You created the last one. You created one this week with Jody Wilson-Raybould's testimony. You create another one with Jerry Butts next week. He said, she said. That's exactly where the Liberals want to be. They want to tie this thing up. I hate boxing analogies, and I apologize, but here's one. You tie up your arm. You tie up the arms. You batten down the hatches, and you drag it out to the point where it becomes very, very unclear and it becomes extremely partisan. And then you can make it a partisan issue out of it and sort of detach yourself away from the issue itself and concentrate on the partisanship. For example, those 5 attorneys general who came out today and said that the RCMP should investigate. If you look at them, every single one of them is from opposition. Yeah. We are splitting this down, and this is becoming a red versus blue issue with some red versus blue and green, I guess, orange with the NDP. And I think that's more that's ground that the Liberals are more sort of safe on playing on instead of having to rely on what came out of a testimony with Ms. Wilson-Raybould.
And I think the strategy here looks to me from the PMO as being, well, we're going to strike back. The fact that Mr. Butts asked to go to committee, he wasn't summoned. He wanted to go give his version of events. And if you read his letter, he warns that he needs a little delay to get legal advice on what he can say and what documents he can provide, which will be interesting because so far, Ms. Wilson-Raybould's testimony has been very compelling, but it's notes that she took from conversations, right? And so I think the Liberals are trying to make the argument, MP Randy Boissonneau was suggesting in the committee meeting, that she doesn't have anything in writing as to what the other side said to her. And I think it will be interesting, and I assume that's what they're counting on to see if Jerry Butts brings some actual stuff in writing that could change the narrative and maybe make it look like their version of events, in their opinion, is the right one.
I think why it's not entirely a he said, she said debate at committee, though, is because we do have this other deputy minister who will speak, and she is supposed to be an impartial civil servant, right? So whether
just
she
like Warnick.
I'll leave that for somebody else to talk about, but whether she verifies Jody Wilson-Raybould's accounting or Butts's or Warnick's, she will be able to, she is a witness.
But she wasn't in every meeting.
But either was Jerry Butts.
No,
that's right. That's the sort of interesting part. Like Jerry Butts can defend himself, the Prime Minister can defend himself. All these, but in essence, like she laid out 11 or 10 meetings with lots and conversations with lots of different people. So I don't know.
There's a second layer to this, which is preoccupying me more and more. Whatever Jerry's going to say next week about the arguments that were made about why this deferred prosecution agreement must be used in this case to cancel a trial that was already scheduled before the criminal code amendments were made. A question that a lot of Canadians are going to have is, why did you at no point make these arguments, not to the Attorney General, but to the Canadian people? Why did you not tell Canadians that the point of doing this was for SNC-Lavalin? The necessity was absolute that this had to happen for SNC-Lavalin. That the jobs were so important that
They would be gone for sure.
that this unprecedented change to the criminal code has to be applied to the first applicant, which was the only applicant they ever really cared about. Why were they not telling you and me that, instead of telling that to the Attorney General? That's a question that I find more and more interesting.
Marty, yeah, go ahead, sir.
They kept it under the radar, right? Which makes it look more nefarious, whether it is or it isn't.
Well, and they're talking about it now because they have to, right? Because of everything that came out.
It's all in the public. Yeah.
Right.
They got caught.
The one thing, and again, streeters are what they are. But the play in terms of English media versus francophone media is fascinating. My colleague here at CBC Montreal did a streeter the other day and did a lot. Interviewed a lot of people. 8 out of 10 people didn't even know what the scandal was. Now, take that with a grain of salt. It being a streeter, of course, and
just
Montreal.
to explain to people what streeters are. That's when you go out. And that's okay. You just go out and you talk to whomever you come across. Yeah.
That's right. So the average Joes that we were interviewed and the average Josephines or whatever, interviewed by CBC Montreal, didn't know what the SNC-Lavalin scandal was. Now, there's a lot of caveats in that. That is, not very scientific, first of all, and also Montreal is its own bubble. But the point is that the place where SNC-Lavalin is based, the news is, not to say it's a nothing burger, but it's certainly not what Watergate reincarnated, which is what some people are calling in Ottawa.
What do you think, Marie? Because we had yesterday David Ertel as part of the Power panel, and he was saying that he noticed a shift in some of the headlines, like the day after the testimony versus before. But that also, he did explain that the perception, obviously, and we've heard this quite often, like what Marty's saying, can be a bit different in Quebec.
Yeah, I don't know how strong the shift is. I think if you look at columns and opinion pieces, they are quite different in English Canada than in Quebec. And I think that's why you heard Minister Bibeau today in her interview with you, which I thought was a very interesting point that she insisted on making, say that actually the majority of jobs in SNC-Lavalin, which are threatened according to the government, are not in Quebec, they're in the rest of Canada. And I found that interesting that the government is also starting to counter that narrative that, no, we're not pandering to Quebec again. Stop saying that Liberals just pander to Quebec because it's jobs elsewhere as well. I thought that tidbit was...
He also...
The only problem with that narrative is the reason that they got into this whole SNC-Lavalin thing to begin with, and it was in sort of at the headwaters of Jody Wilson-Raybould's testimony the other day, was that they were saying that they were doing it because of the coming Quebec election in October. They weren't... I mean, the jobs thing came up sort of tangentially, but Quebec, for whatever reason, the PMO decided that the coming Quebec election was going to be, SNC-Lavalin was going to be a big deal. I checked, it wasn't.
No, and that's what David Ertel said too. That's what he said too.
Yeah, but presumably, if you were to learn in the middle of an election that SNC-Lavalin is leaving Canada, it would become an issue because every time a company is sold to an Ontario company or an American company, it's a big deal.
But that point that she made in her testimony, Marty, was central to why she thought it was inappropriate. Yeah, that point was central. Okay. Go ahead. Last point to Paul.
There's another layer to this too. If the Liberals are becoming more and more overt in saying that they have to do this, they have to spare SNC-Lavalin from a trial so that they can save all these jobs, one notes they haven't yet done it. As with pipelines, so with SNC-Lavalin, you can count on Justin Trudeau and his gang to offer all assistance short of actual help.